Welcome. Rise and Set, Fall 2022. Let me just turn on my camera here as well as ask for my panel to also do the same. I'm also going to stop sharing here. Hello, hello. Big. Thanks, everybody. So I know we have a few people still jumping on as we speak, but just want to open up and say, with my camera on, welcome to another Rise and Set. Just to let everybody know what Rise and Set is. So really the genesis of Rise and Set started as a very small internal newsletter and has now grown in many iterations to now a 2 times per year summit that we really just welcome all of our client teams, all of our partner teams into our virtual walls, and we talk about what is really impacting our industries, the overall advertising marketplace at a macro level. Really, there's a lot of things going on at all times. We know that our industry is changing seemingly every hour. So we are wanting to just share the wealth in regards to knowledge sharing whenever and wherever we can. So first off, I want to say thank you all that are on the line today. We're in the depths of Q4, so even an hour out of your day is really hard to find these days. So thank you very, very much. This will be extremely interesting conversation. And also I want to say thank you to our panel. So these 3 that you see on the panel today, each will bring their own interesting and individual perspectives, which I'll have them introduce themselves in a second. But they've really been hearing me nag at them for the last month to get all of this coordinated and organized. So again, I thank you for your patience, panel. We're really, really happy to have you. But just for intros, my name is Adam Ortman. I'm an SVP of Innovation here at Generator Media and Analytics, working side by side all of the teams here at Generator. And I will actually just start us off with Kolpana, if you want to start us with a quick intro about you as well as the organization that you represent.
Yes, thank you so much, Adam. My name is Kolpana Sawani. I'm the VP of Client Strategy here at InMarket. And InMarket is a mobile location platform, and we also work with our partners to provide 360-degree intelligence to help them learn more about their consumers.
Beautiful. And Matt?
Hi, my name is Matt Timothy. I'm the EVP of Customer Success at BlockBoard. BlockBoard was launched 3 years ago. We're a CTV OTT platform, and we're all about accountability and transparency and solving the waste issues.
Thank you. And Caitlin?
Hi, everyone. I'm Caitlin. I am a business lead on Google's agency partnerships team, and I oversee everything from video, CTV, YouTube TV, to search as well. Very excited to be here.
Perfect. And thank you all. And again, thank you all for your time, not only just today, but also over the last few weeks, just getting everything prepped for the great session that we're going to be having this afternoon and this morning. So just as some housekeeping items, we are using Microsoft Teams for this presentation. There are some items for you all as the audience members to be aware of. We do have reactions available either the top or the bottom of your screen. So if you want to give us a little smiley face or a little applause to the panel, feel free to do so. They love seeing that. Chat is also open. So if you have a question throughout, feel free to throw it in. We'll try to do our best to either work it into the conversation we're having at that time, or we do have time slated at the end of this presentation to have an open QA. So today's presentation will be recorded, so don't feel like you have to jot down notes or try to keep up with all of that. This will be provided to all of you that are on the line today, early next week, just as we get it cleaned up. And just for an agenda, we're having intros right now. We're going to go through our topic points, which was supplied in the invite that you all received. And then we're going to have a little bit of 10 minutes of Q&A at the very, very end. So what are we talking about today? We're talking about inflation. We're talking about recession. We're talking about just economic adversity as a whole, right? I think we as not only consumers feel this on a daily basis, but also us as business leaders across industries are also feeling this, whether this is increases in costs from a supply chain perspective, whether this is reevaluating your budgets going into 2023. This is a topic that is really impacting us on a very wide scope. And so we wanted to not only come with some very good ideas about going into 2023, being a brand and understanding, how do I continue to succeed? How do I continue to grow business? How do I continue to serve my customers in an empathetic way, and even potentially make those bonds stronger. So we're really talking about economic adversity and how you all, in regards to brands, can really succeed through tactics. And again, each of the panelists that we have curated for you today bring a different perspective to the table, which I'm very, very excited about. So let's jump right in. Panel, are we ready? Y'all looking great, by the way. You're looking great. Perfect. All right, well, let's jump right in. So our first talking point is really about consumer behavior shifts. We know that as the economy fluctuates, the purchase power as well as the purchase behaviors of our clients change, whether that is buying different. I mean, I know it. I am a consumer myself. I'm, reevaluating trips in the future or brands that I'm buying. So Kalpana, from an in-market perspective, how are you seeing these shifts in consumer behaviors? And I think even more importantly for this conversation, how are brands reacting to those shifts?
Yeah, so what we're seeing from our data, we're seeing that consumers are definitely going to the value retailers on a more frequent basis, on a more loyal basis. They're definitely comparison shopping, looking at where they can get the best deals, whether it's the dollar stores or Walmart. We're also seeing consumers shift their behavior, their purchase behaviors. So we're seeing for certain subcategories and categories where private label is really coming out strong. So, I think that consumers are definitely looking for those alternatives. They're switching, and they're also trying to look for the best deals and the best value where they can. What's really important for brands to understand is that if your brand is able to still deliver that value proposition, whether it's product quality or longer lasting materials or whatnot, consumers are still willing to spend where they find value. And I'm not talking about purely price. So you don't have to slash your prices as a brand, just understanding what that value messaging is that'll resonate with your consumers. I also think that ways to reward loyalty and repeat purchase and repeat visits is something that consumers will really appreciate at this time. So I think that consumers are definitely looking to extend their dollars where they can, and where brands can help them meet that need. Those brands will definitely see consumers returning to their brands.
Sure. And Caitlin, anything from Google's perspective? So how are you all seeing consumers' behaviors shift? And it's interesting from a Google perspective, because we know just how vast those properties are. And then also, how are you typically seeing brands react to these shifts?
Yeah, definitely. And I can speak even more to like in a timeliness sense, knowing that it's holiday season. And for anyone who's on the call who is a retail brand, this is like definitely heads up. We're seeing people search for products earlier and earlier, at least on the holiday side. We're seeing people, even large players, create like newer opportunities, like new Prime days and new sales opportunities from a promotional standpoint, because we know that over half of shoppers are planning on buying less this year, at least for holiday. But I think, Kalpana mentioned really, really well, just like around the fact that people are definitely thinking about value. We're seeing people searching for promotions and in some cases, best bang for your buck. So it's also a huge opportunity for new brands to come into the market and kind of leverage it as a brand awareness play. So there's still an opportunity there, obviously, but definitely aligned with what Kalpana is saying.
And Matt, anything from BlockBoard?
Yeah, so we're looking at it through the reaction of the advertisers that we currently partner with and what they ask for. And what we're starting to see is them asking a lot for performance metrics over media metrics, more and more. They're asking for more transparency about where every single dollar goes up and down. We're in the programmatic space, up and down that programmatic chain or that supply chain, where those dollar goes. They're trying to make sure that every dollar is working its hardest here. They can't afford waste in any way. So we started seeing that in third quarter, and to echo what Kalpana said, like we have some toy clients, toy manufacturer clients. They started early, in terms of getting their messaging out and trying to sell much earlier than they did last year. So.
So I know that I know we've had a couple retail examples at this point, but what about any service or lead gen type organizations? So think higher ed or even service industries. Any type of behavioral shifts or even advice for those types of groups?
Overall, we're seeing from a category perspective, regardless of vertical, that there is this large shift of being brand loyal versus category loyal. So whether it is financial services, whether it's education tech, people are looking more so now for, ed tech near me, or, best insurance plan for X percent or X
Sure.
financial dollar versus a specific brand. Historically, we've seen that kind of differentiate amongst verticals where some people are super brand loyal and you see really high increases in certain brand terms for that category. But right now it's all pretty much focused on category first, brand second.
And I think delivering to the consumers the convenience, right? I think with COVID, telehealth really boomed, and finally people were more comfortable with it. Learning via Zoom and learning via electronic platforms became the only way you could continue learning, right? So I think in those higher ed industries where, you can still allow consumers to come on campus and learn the way they want to learn, but also have the ability to do hybrid learning and promoting that, and also promoting very specific degrees that are very valuable right now, whether it's data science or, analyst jobs or anything like that, where, those degrees and those certificates are in high demand, and will help the consumer at the end of the day get a job when they're, ready, in market. I think, again, thinking about that value driver of like how this education can help the consumer at the end of the day pay back their loans and get a job.
Love that. Yeah, and I think you're actually pulling me into kind of our next topic, which is, we're looking backwards at what's happening or what has happened with consumer behavior shifts, and you're kind of pulling me into that next topic of what is our advice to brands, right? How should they react going into economic shifts in order to succeed? So you've talked about being nimble, you've talked about rethinking their promotional strategies. Any other piece of advice specifically for brands going into a what is forecast to be a turbulent 2023? Yeah.
I would say creative. Make sure your creative's on point. Don't be tone deaf, to be blunt. I had a client back during COVID who wanted to put out a creative of having a big pool party. And we kind of looked at it and we were like, we're still social distancing. This doesn't make a lot of sense right now. So we went back to the drawing board. So I think definitely be creative and be ready to pivot those creative assets as well, to make sure that you're empathizing with your consumers.
Matt, any other advice in regards to what brands should be thinking about going into 2023 given behavioral shifts?
Yeah, leaping off of the creative, because I think that part is spot on. It's what we're starting to see and feel from our current client base, and that is they're looking for a detailed understanding in terms of where the dollars have gone, right, and what they're spending and what they're getting. So from a best practice, from a suggested standpoint, don't stop advertising. One of the worst things that we can do is stop talking to our customers, right? Not talking to your customers is not a way to grow new customers, right? So make sure that every dollar that you have is the vast majority of it is in front of real customers, and then that's when the creative has to match what that client, what that potential customer is feeling and going through. And you see it in some creative out there now. They reference gas prices and how they're helping, like, we're going to reduce the cost of our pizza by 20% because gas prices are so high, right? It's that kind of, we empathize with you. I think that was the word before. And the other thing, you said it, Adam, and I just want to jump off it. Nimble wins. Nimble wins, right? Now is the time to kind of test these things and different types of creative and different targeting strategies and things like that, because you still have to talk to your customer, and now's the time to figure out the new ways to kind of do that. So I think look at this as an opportunity as opposed to a challenge.
I love that. I think nimbleness is very much so key I'm pretty sure one of you will probably use that as your single most important takeaway at the end of this. But nimbleness is something. I mean, just looking backwards at just the generator teams and the great work that we've been doing. Just making sure that we don't know what the future exactly holds. We can do our best in the forecasting, but even being able to pull out of buys on a dime, right? Making sure that you're not locking yourself into an annualized contract, for example. So there are so many different ways and tactically that you can work with your teams to ensure that you are nimble, right? And making sure that you're able to turn, and pivot as quickly as possible given any shifts. And I think that last 2 years has really taught us the importance of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I mean,
And I would also add that,
Yeah, please.
go ahead, Matt, you go.
No, I'll just, during the pandemic, everything shifted to e-commerce and everything was on the lead gen side. It was all, how do we get people to click and buy and do this? What we're seeing now is another shift. This is why we have to be nimble. It's people are going back to physical retail, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so now a lot of our advertisers are starting to support their physical retail as opposed to their e-commerce stuff. And that is not a shift that I expected. So that's where nimbleness really, really comes in.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I would just add that, going back to Caitlin's point of being creative, like, focusing on the creative and making sure it resonates and it's not tone deaf. I think also getting creative with your messaging, trying new formats and trying new, either going after new audiences or trying new programs that you wouldn't even think of. So for instance, Taco Bell launched a subscription-based program for tacos, Tuesdays and Thursdays. Denny's did the endless breakfast early on. So, how can you test out new programs and really get creative with your messaging, with your promotions to draw in those customers? And then maybe how can you find new customers that you maybe hadn't thought of before and, create specific programs that would resonate for them versus your traditional, customer.
Such a good example. And I'm actually just curious of the nearly 50 people that are listening to us. If you have subscribed to the taco subscription, let us know. Throw it in the chat. We want to know. There's no judgment here. I even consider it myself. So we'd love to hear from you all. But that's great. I mean, Copeland, you're doing a great job pulling us through this because we're talking now about InMarket and the organization that you represent specifically. What are some innovative ways? You gave some great examples, but from some innovative ways regarding the practice that your team really handles that we could be leaning more heavily into or even just kind of rethinking going into the next year?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think one of the things we help marketers do is understand their consumers, but also understand their competitors' consumers and also try to reveal new customers that they may not have thought of. I think in certain industries, for instance, we work with a lot of AlcBev brands, and the majority of AlcBev, especially during the pandemic, it was all about buying at the grocery store or delivery services, so that shift to delivery services was also really kind of a big, there was a big jump there because of the pandemic. But now we're seeing our AlcBev partners also looking to promote on-premise because consumers are back at at dining locations, and so both on premise and off premise are both really important for AlcBev brands, and we're seeing them get pretty creative too, where one of our partners just launched a rebate offer for on premise dining in premise. So you wouldn't think, oh, I can get a rebate for ordering this beer instead of that beer when I'm at Buffalo Wild Wings. But hey, our partner decided to launch a program, and it actually worked really well. And not only for their brand, but also for their dining partner, right? Because they're helping drive consumers to their dining partner. So thinking about ways that your advertising spend not only supports your brand, but those larger business relationships that can really help your brand at the end of the day. And that's something that we're really very much a big thought leader on, is like, when all boats rise, we all win. How can we be better partners, not only to our advertisers, but our agency partners, because when you all win, we win too. So what else can we bring to the table that's unique and supports all businesses.
Caitlin, what about from the Google's perspective? What innovative ways from, using your Google's perspective, your Google lens, should brands be really looking at taking advantage of strengthening that communication with their consumers, or empathizing with their consumers going into next year?
Yeah, well, I think I'll take it from the lens of being innovative from an advertiser's perspective, if that's okay. I think this is a huge opportunity because there will be brands that will pull out, and they'll be the ones that choose not to advertise. The space could become a little bit less crowded, and we know from cost per click perspective, from share of voice perspective, typically that allows us to get more bang for your buck, if you will, from an advertiser's perspective. So I think it's a huge opportunity for us to continuously capitalize off of share of voice and market share. And other than that, I think it's an awesome opportunity to test new audiences possibly, and test, leverage your first party data to really understand who your true audience is and what they look like and what they like to eat and what they like to do on the weekends. We're lucky right now where we have so much data that a lot of us sleep on it. A lot of us don't really understand how much opportunity this data can present. So although it's not quite innovative, it's something that I think a lot of people, don't leverage as much. So just really double downing on first party data, testing new solutions and new audiences for sure.
And Matt, from BlockBoard's perspective,
what I can add to that is, since we focus primarily on CTV and OTT, and we deal with video advertising. One of the things that we're doing with our advertisers now is helping them harness frequency across devices, right? So frequency to us has always been either completely underthought on linear TV and completely overthought in digital, right? And it's somewhere in the middle. And if you have a chance to tell a story over a series of pieces of creative or a series of interactions with a customer, the data that Caitlin was referring to, what we know, the behaviors that we capture, we should be able to get closer with each frequency, right? Until there's a behavior that happens. And to me, focusing on frequency and time, certainly in times like this, makes a ton of sense. Because once you've found the right person, now you figure out how you're going to tell them the story, him or her the story, in exactly the right way. And I think that's just an unholy opportunity that we all have in front of us right now.
I think that's great. Yeah. Sequential messaging is, I think, just due to the advancement in technology, especially within digital video, you're able to then tell a longer story where historically we've been stuck within the confines of a storyboard that's 15, 30 seconds, or even, slightly more than that. So we as advertisers and even as creatives are probably banging our head against the wall to say, how do we tell a very robust message in a very short period of time? I mean, I was just listening to a masterclass about the origins of Got Milk, which was obviously we all know that campaign, but they had that same thought of, we're servicing the milk industry, but how do we make this as short as possible? And that's how they got to Got Milk, which was really, really interesting. But now the tables are turning because we're able to hit a single individual with multiple messages. So I think that's extremely, extremely innovative. And I know that this is kind of all encompassing because we're not only able to do from a video perspective, but also from a remarketing perspective, or even a campaign, like sequential campaign perspective as well with display or otherwise.
Right.
So I love that. All right, we've talked about what we should be doing. Now let's talk about the big no-nos in the space, right? We're going into a very sensitive time for consumers. We're going into a very sensitive time for brands. So Caitlin, back to you in regards to, from Google's side, what should brands avoid doing during this time, right? We've talked about being nimble. We've talked about promotional strategy. We've talked about sequential messaging, but what are some things that brands should turn the other way and run?
Do not stop advertising. Do not stop investing in different advertising platforms. I think the obvious answer or reason behind that would be because you're providing advertiser platforms like Google money, but that's not actually the case. You also have to think
She said that's not the case, and Google got mad, shut her
Yeah,
off.
apparently.
So while she's picking back up, Kolpana, do you want to continue on?
Yeah, to Caitlin's point is that when brands go dark, out of mind, out of, if you're not talking to your consumers, if you're not building that one-to-one connection, that is the perfect opportunity for your competitors to sweep in, for challenger brands to sweep in. So, do not go dark. There's a ton of data out there that shows that brands that continue to spend during recessionary times actually come out stronger after the recession is over. And by the way, recession is just part of the cyclical process. Every 7 years or so, we're in a recession. We're going to get out of this. It's a bump in the road. And in fact, there's a ton of data that also shows that periods of growth last longer than periods of recession. So most recessions last 1 to 2 years at most. And then you'll see the American economy kind of clawing back its way and growing once more. So you definitely don't want to miss out on that. And, I would also say, we are sitting on a ton of this data. Use the data as best as you can. It is very overwhelming at times, but don't close your eyes to it. And also, while the tried and true solutions work and you can continue investing in those, think about ways that, there might be a new strategy that you hadn't thought of. This is a good time to test because partners are willing to give you better deals now than ever before because
Absolutely.
we want everyone to win. So, ask for what you want. Don't be shy. And, it is a good opportunity to test new items or new platforms, new partners. While you continue spending with those that have been proven for a long time with you.
So lean heavily into the data, lean heavily into it. So Matt, from BlockBoard's perspective, what are some things that brands should avoid?
Certainly going dark. I think that we've talked about that. The other thing that they should avoid is the set it and forget it mentality, right? Like like a lot of very centralized companies, they have centralized marketing. They've got their one spot, and this is what's always worked, and so on and so forth. And to build on what Kalpana said, it's time to test. This is the time because everything's shifting in the consumer's world, and you don't know how it's going to end up when it comes out on the other side. Everything's shifting in your world. This is the time to do it, right? And this is the time you're going to learn either new customer segments or different ways of targeting. So you have to avoid the set it and forget it. You have to avoid the wet cement gone dry kind of idea, right? It once it dries and you're operating on that, it could be kind of tough and difficult in these times. So
yeah. I have a follow-up question to that, because I think that when a lot of brands come to the table and we have conversations about the wet cement. When you talk about wet cement to a brand that is already looking at budget cuts, they're already looking at safeguarding their profit, sometimes wet cement can be expensive. So how do we balance the testing and basically not letting your cement dry, but also keeping very conservative for a business going into potentially economic turbulent times?
So from our perspective, that's transparency about your buy, transparency about where the dollars go. There should be zero tolerance for waste, and as all these markets have emerged over time, we've tolerated a certain inefficiencies in how things are done. We can't do that going forward, right? And so the way that you can tighten up your budget, or when you're facing kind of these budget these issues, is go back and look what you're already spending and how it's spent and where it's going and how much is truly working for you versus how much is being sucked out of the CPM stream, right, into other non-working media players. I think that's how you stay in the wet cement.
And I would also add to Matt's point is measure where you can, really lean on your providers and your partners to offer you attribution solutions where you can, whether it's sales lift studies or visitation lift studies. Where those are absolutely not available, then lean on the data. What data can you extract from customer engagement? What, is there a brand lift study that can be done instead of the sales lift study? So there are a lot of options. I think that there are ways that marketers can get really smart with their spends and extract as much out of their spends as they can. Consumers are being very demanding with brands right now. So with the brands, we can be demanding with our partners as well, right? So let's make sure that we're spending where we're getting the most bang for our buck too.
I completely agree. And I think that media accountability has been not only, I mean, I feel like just with the increasing amounts of data, the increasing the amounts of tracking, we have the ability now to, Matt, to your point, to have very nearly zero tolerance for waste. And I think that is a great justification to looking towards testing. And so for many of our campaigns, we do move forward with this kind of 70-20-10 rule. And some of our clients or even partners may have heard about this from our side, where 70% of your budget should really be looking at your tried and true, your workhorse dollars. The 20% should be looking at your existing media mix, your campaigns, and maybe reimagining an audience or reimagining a specific target or a placement within that existing tactic. And that 10% could be off the wall ideas, right? Understanding what is something we've never tried before, and let's just throw it out there. But again, that 10%, while going into economic, turbulence or even adversity going into next year, maybe that 10% is 5%, right? So just having a reasonable amount of it of budget set aside, or just it doesn't even need to be that necessarily formalized. It could be more just thinking and constantly innovating and just testing going into this new market. Because if you stop doing that and you stagnate, Matt, your cement gets dry, and you don't want that, right? So Caitlin, I'm glad you're back. We were just talking about how you're on mute, by the way. How important it is to continue testing going into 2023. So if you want to continue on from either add on to that specific topic, or where we got cut off from.
Sorry about that. Yeah, my team put out. No, I think testing is incredibly important, and I think one of the first things that advertisers kind of do, it's like trigger finger, is they choose to turn off brand search and they choose to shift investments from kind of the higher funnel tactics. And we've seen time and time again that both of those, they can put a Band-Aid on a situation, but ultimately the long-term growth, you're just not going to see it if you're not investing in some of those tactics. Ultimately, you need to be building brand awareness to capture that demand down below. And so we do notice that, like, for those who pull back now, they're the ones who are going to be spending up to 6 years to keep up with their peer set who chose to be evergreen, over that period of time. So that would just be like a one tidbit from me in terms of what not to do.
So just to clarify, if a brand were to pause during times like these, Google has seen that when they do turn back on, that they're about they actually end up 6 years behind.
It's not Google's data. I'm fairly certain it was eMarketer where I read that, but yeah, it takes about 6 years to get back to the same market share or share of voice that you had 6 years prior with that same peer set. So just something to note. Like, this is definitely
that's a big note. Yeah, that's a big note, because you are basically pulling your fishing rod out of a very aggressive pond, right? And those other, the other fishermen and the other competitors within your space. And this is space agnostic. This is industry agnostic.
It's space agnostic.
That you're basically giving up that share of voice. That's really interesting.
And then I think the other thing too is
please.
Like from brand trust, right? Outside of all of the financial indicators or implications to consumers and brands alike, right now, our consumers are looking at us to see what we're doing. So if we're slowing down, if they're seeing us less and less, there's also this inherent lack of trust that they'll probably start creating with that particular brand. And they'll start resonating with the brands that have continued to stay on and continued to advertise during these, tougher economic times.
Yeah. And I think to package this up, just maintaining conversations with your customers is so critical, because it's times like these where you're turning obstacles into opportunities, and these are times where a brand can actually strengthen their bonds with their consumers through that empathy, through just understanding their needs and their wants and their shifting lives and being there. I mean, I think it was Kia, I believe, that did if you lose your job, there's going to be a forgiveness program that we can pull you into. And I think that is masterful in regards to just listening to your customer, not necessarily changing your product, but just changing the way that you engage, I think is really, really, really important. And so, Caitlin, while I have you, we are going into this recessionary period.
Yeah.
We've been here before. 2008 was not too long ago. It seems like it was yesterday. The time flies. So when you're looking at today, 2022 versus 2007, 2008, going into the recession, what are we armed with today that we didn't have before that we should be taking advantage of going into a potential next recession?
Everything. We are in such a better position this time around. I think some of the obvious, right? We have first-party data, we have third-party data still. We have so many different advertising platforms and CRM systems that we can leverage to close that sales loop, close that leads loop, that we can really, leverage to be nimble and to be efficient during this time. I think I don't see this recession impacting at least our advertisers to the degree that media might be making it kind of look like. So I just think there's so much more. 2008, Google was barely a thing. So it's just a completely different ballgame we're playing in with such a fruitful opportunity here.
I mean, I think YouTube was still in diapers in 2008.
Literally, yeah, wasn't a thing.
So Matt, from BlockBoard's perspective, what's the difference between now and 2008, and how should brands be leveraging that difference to their benefit?
In 2008, we were still living under Wanamaker's favorite line. I know 50% of my ad budget's wasted. I just don't know which 50%, right? That was more of the reality than it is today. Today, we are getting closer and closer to understanding that other 50% and making it 100% transparent. I think that is a fundamental shift and a powerful one. It's going to change not just television, but advertising in general going forward. It's happening right now.
And I think to that point, not only do we have much more transparency, we can understand, we have all this data available, but it's almost near real time. Yeah. So, it used to be that you had 3 months, once your campaign was ended, then you'd understand, okay, was that a good investment or not? Now, within 2 weeks or so, you understand so much more. You can see consumer behavior shift nearly in real time. We're able to see, okay, now we're seeing consumers, go back in store. Like during COVID, everyone was locked down. And, this time last year, we started to, in near real time, see people starting to go back in store for the holiday shopping because they were tired of being locked down, and till today, Matt, I think mentioned it earlier that consumers now are going back to stores. So we're even though consumer businesses doubled down on their e-commerce capabilities, we're now seeing consumers actually prefer going back in store till now, now that they're feeling much more comfortable. So that real-time ability to measure and be more transparent goes back to our theme earlier of being nimble. So, what can you do? What can brands do to really captivate and capitalize on that real-time data and that opportunity that is presented there?
Yeah. Do we have some examples on? I know this is going to be off the question list, just to go crazy. Do we have some examples on, how to use that data to a campaign, for example? So Google, I know that you have a lot of audiences at your disposal. I mean, all of you do. Any way that you would basically leverage large amounts of data that you are collecting today that you may not necessarily have collected in 2008, and how does a new buy look in today's market?
So, well, how much can I sell Google product? No, I'm kidding.
0%.
0%. Okay, noted. Yeah, I think there's just, like as mentioned earlier, we can now officially close that sales loop, that lead gen loop. Personally, I would use some type of SEM system. If I was a lead gen client, I would follow them through that system through pixels, tags, etc. And then leverage a CRM system like Salesforce. And this is not sponsored, but I'm just thinking Salesforce to close that loop, work with your sales team, make sure we're qualifying those leads, and then feed that back into the system. That was something that just didn't exist even, a few years ago. So I guess the theme here for me is like, we can now close those loops, and we can use AI to also predict consumer behavior before they press purchase and identify new customers through certain solutions that some of these platforms provide. There's so much we could do a whole.
I really like that. I think that closing the loop is something I remember. I remember trying to just piece IDs together.
Right.
This is back in the day, and using those SEM platforms that you mentioned, Caitlin, and just trying to get IDs through a CRM and then pass them back. And then now everything is much more seamless and much more automated. And I think that especially for those lead gen, those higher ed, those service-based organizations, that's a godsend. And that's definitely where we should be moving our money. Our dollars, because Matt, to your points that you've made multiple times, accountability, that a sale is not just a sale, but it's basically a sale turns into how many future sales, a lead matures into what sale. And so I think that when we're looking at future campaigns, we should be looking a little bit deeper than just the surface sale and look more towards LTV, look more towards those deeper metrics that provide longevity, so that when businesses are looking and forecasting for a potentially turbulent time, a single sale may no longer just be a single sale, but it may be 10 sales in the future during their lifetime. And that's where that communication, that ongoing touch points are so critical. Absolutely. Anything else to add across the group just regarding the 2008 versus now? Kolpin, anything from your side?
Yeah, I think that as advertisers have so much more choice, so it can be very confusing. Where do I invest? And I think that, also I think that there is that stronger connection between brands and consumers. Consumers can really shout out through Twitter and the social feeds almost immediately. So I think that having your systems in place so that you're able to react really quickly and respond to consumer concerns, or this whole thing with, I hate to bring it up, but it was all over the headlines with Adidas and Kanye, and it took them 2 weeks to respond, right? And it's like, in this day and age, 2 weeks is a long time to be silent. So I think that there's definitely a lot more that brands have to do, and I think that you want to make sure that your teams are well connected and understand the ramifications of it. And again, it kind of goes back to that being nimble and responding as quickly as you can to really meet the consumer and that consumer demand that's necessary.
Perfect. So I'm getting a question on the side here, which I think is a good point to interject. So Phil, also just a reminder for those on the call, if you do want to use that chat function, please do with any questions that you have. One of the questions that we have that just came in was really about the branding versus retail. And I think this is actually perfect because the e-commerce space is night and day different than when we were in 2008, right? Expectation has changed. Amazon 2-day shipping. If you don't have 2-day shipping, what are we even doing here? So when you're looking at consumer expectations changing and brands that are still trying to balance this e-commerce environment, whether mature or new to them, as well as a brick and mortar retail environment, how do we balance the two? What advice do we have for brands that are trying to balance the two? And it might be an owned and operated retail establishment, or even going through a retail partner or a franchise partner. How do brands really look to balance the retail versus e-commerce landscape that is existing today?
I hear this all the time. I have worked with new business clients, so clients who are brand new to our SEM platform, brand new to advertising, and then also with massive clients. And my challenge to them is always, we should be investing in whichever channels are making us the most revenue. So I've definitely worked with clients who are a lot smaller. They might have, say, an Amazon storefront, and that's performing super, super well for them, versus, a couple of the retail partners that they're selling offline to. I always say double down where you're making the most profitability. And so it's not like the easiest answer per se, but really understand, where that revenue is coming from and what's performing best, especially at this time.
Matt, what about from BlockBoard's perspective?
We have actually started to see it, and that is, and we see it in the creative. So there's different creative approaches for retail customers and for e-commerce customers, right? One's a real call to action, right? Literally like click now, do this now, and the other's much more of an encouragement to go, and whether it's enticements through promotions or whatever. But what the advertiser is then able to figure out is what are the nuances, what are the differences in messaging, what works and what doesn't work in each of those channels. But it's a balance, and we see the best approach so far is that it's addressed in the creative and at the beginning of the conversation.
Open it.
I'd say that our data shows that about 80% of purchases still happen in store, in retail, and and what we're also seeing is that our data is showing that people, COVID aside, when everyone was doing everything online and not going out to eat in any establishments, now we're seeing the foot traffic data is showing that everyone is, well, not everybody, but I'd say 80% are going back to dining establishments and, retail stores. Shopping is key. I think from a human perspective, we're social animals, and we do enjoy, for the majority of the people, maybe like 80% really do enjoy going to restaurants, going to the malls. You need to touch and feel the products. I think, to Caitlin's point, maybe those smaller brands, those challenger brands, do start e-commerce because it's cheaper. It's a really nice way to enter the market with very low risk. But then you also see these e-commerce brands that now have retail storefronts, Allbirds. And even, there's some beauty brands that started with e-commerce with, these were social influencers that started their e-commerce brands, and now they have partnerships with Ulta. So I think the in-store and in-location can really allow for that discoverability. There might be consumers that Live Tinted, for instance, is one social influencer brand that I've been following, and now they have a partnership with Ulta. So now that allows them to be discovered by other consumers that may not be on those social channels, right? So I think that there's you need to meet your consumers where they are and how they like to shop and how they like to interact with your brands. But I think as social consumers, we still, we need to look and feel and see other people. And I think there's still that enjoyment that people do enjoy going to big box stores and retailers. And also, even though we still have the, 2-day or 1-day delivery, there's something to be said about when you're out of sugar, you just run to the store and you have it within minutes, right? So I think there's also that immediacy. So it really depends on the branding. What we're seeing with the data is that when it comes to those, for lack of a better term, commodity type brands, consumers may leverage e-commerce, but they'll use add to cart technologies to create their lists. And at the end of the day, the majority of that spend still happens in store. But when it comes to certain, like whether it's healthcare products or higher ticket items, that's where e-commerce is really kind of like they want it. They want to make sure that they can get it and it's not, it's in stock. They can get it delivered by such and such a date. Then, it varies. So again, it comes down to the data, but I think both are critical. And it depends on the stage of your business. If you're a mature brand and you just need to grow, or if you're starting out.
So having a degree in consumer psychology, this is fascinating to me because I feel like we're in a position where everything is evolving, right? Customer perception, customer action. brand reaction. I think that we're in a state of evolution and change, and I'm really interested to see, let's have a Rise and Set summit in 5 years and see, and maybe readdress some of these topics. I think that would be very, very interesting. So we're coming up at the end here. We have 10 more minutes, but I do want to do just a quick snippet of what's the takeaway, right? So if we were to find one single takeaway from today's session to give advice to those on the phone today, Caitlin, what would be your number one?
Play the long game. Don't think about where your business is today. Think about where they're going to be in 5 years, and make sure we understand the impact of what we're doing today on that 5-year business.
Matt?
Focus on the rise of performance as a critical KPI outside of just media metrics KPIs, right? Tell you, Lexus and Tide have very different business KPIs, but they share the same media KPIs like in television, right? Doesn't make any sense. They are media KPIs are just proxies ultimately, and with all the data that we're awash in now, it's going to be about performance, and we're starting to see it. And so if you focus on performance, you're going to be ahead of the game.
I love that Tide versus Lexus perspective. Actually, that's fresh for me. So thank you very much. Kalpana, your number one takeaway?
I'd say pivot where you can, where the data leads you, leverage the data best you can to make those decisions. But going back to being that theme of being nimble and pivoting, meet the consumers where they are, where the needs are, and you'll see success.
Perfect. I love this because I think that we're going into 2023 with a very optimistic view, right? There may be mountains ahead of some of us, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we're not strapping on our hiking shoes and our walking poles and able to summit them very, very easily. Just being armed with what we have in front of us, being nimble, data accountability, messaging, understanding your competitive market, understanding your consumers' needs and wants. All right, so I'm going to open it up to the group here in regards to Q&A. So feel free to just use that chat bubble either in the top or bottom of your screen. And if you want to ask any of these lovely humans a question regarding recession, regarding inflation, going into next year, kind of campaign dynamics, etc. And I'm getting one on the side here. This is actually a very good one. So yes, we have been referencing large brands. We've been Allbirds, Tide, Lexus has come up in these conversations. But to pose to the panel here, how do these changes fluctuate between larger brands and maybe a smaller brand, right? A smaller brand that is not necessarily contending with the global brands of the world. So Kalpana, from your perspective, how would you say, or how would you respond to this individual? Just trying to get some clarity about, are these themes still reminiscent for smaller or larger companies?
Absolutely. I think, that with the smaller brands, we're seeing them being as really leveraging data and insights, and also, they tend to be the ones that really also want the measurement solutions and making sure that they're getting the most out of their media spends. So I would say yes, 100%. This is all of this advice is an opportunity for even the smaller brands to glean from. And I would say this is almost the perfect time for smaller brands to really launch in a big way, because there are going to be advertisers that will pull back. And we've seen time and time again in recessionary times, that's when the brands that we know and we interact with every day now, like Airbnb, for instance. I was just listening to a podcast where they launched during the 2008 recession. And now they're, they have $1 billion market cap, so this is definitely a time for those challenger brands, those smaller brands, to make a big impact and really find their consumers, really target, hone in. And we also have the tools now to really, slice and dice and find their consumers for them. One thing I also say is that we've talked about value and price quite a bit. this is still an opportunity for even the luxury brands to find the right consumers. There's our data shows that we did a consumer survey, and about 31% of the consumers we surveyed mentioned that they were going to still pay more for the brands they want. They still wanted to go on vacation. They still wanted to buy furniture. So, lean on your partners to help you find, some marketers are calling them that middle, they still have income and they still want to get the brands and the high quality that they expect.
That value. Yeah, exactly. Matt, Caitlin, open up to you.
Yeah.
Just in regards to the size of the companies, do these themes ring true?
Yeah, I think that they do. We've mentioned big brands on this panel. But all the advice between the three of us, or the perspective between the three of us, is really sums up for those big brands to act like small brands.
Oh, yeah.
True.
Think about
Exactly,
it,
that's
right?
true.
So smaller brands, every decision they make is much more existential than a larger brand, right? A larger brand can absorb things that a smaller brand can't, right? So they have to be, here it is again, nimble, right? And they are the ones that are pushing for the innovation, quite frankly, right? And so I think that all of this is really geared towards the strength that smaller brands have in this environment, to Kalpana's point. And I think the advice that we're giving here is really for the big brands to act like the small brands.
Love it. Love it. And Google?
Everyone took essentially what I would say. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, I've worked with tiny brands at Google and I've worked with massive brands at Google. And I get the most excited working with the smaller brands because I think they are more open to testing and we do see a lot more direct impact success. I would say as long as you're a brand that's willing to pivot and be flexible with the times, you will be successful. It doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter the size.
And I also think, just from Generator's perspective and just seeing the campaigns that we're running today across the board, is that indifferent of size, budgets can be very creative with tactical execution, especially with new social media platforms springing out of the ground every day, or new digital inventory, audiences, placements, even linear fire sales, right? So there are ways for smaller brands and larger brands. It's really indifferent because of today's marketplace. We're not back in the 60s where it costs a large amount of money to do any type of advertising. If you even have a smaller budget, you can still be a very powerful contender if you are placing your media effectively, keeping that accountability very, very high, and approaching your consumers and your targets creatively. I think that there's still a place for really every size of company.
Yeah.
But we're 2 minutes left here. I just want to pause and say thank you guys again. Thank you, panel, for all of your great brains that we've brought into this panel. We're going into an interesting time, again, turning obstacles into opportunities going into next year. And I personally am very optimistic, right? So we're having fantastic conversations with our clients today. But for those on the phone, if you do have any follow-up questions for those on the panel, or even just your Generator team, feel free to reach out. Just reply back to that invite that you got for today's summit. And again, thank you all so much for your time today. We do these twice per year, so keep an eye out for the Spring's Rise and Set Summit, which we're thinking about theming as rising trends. There's a lot going on with Meta. There's a lot going on with Netflix and Uber. So maybe a different panel. I know these guys are probably like, thank God I don't want to do this again, but it'll be a good time and really good content going into next spring. But thank you all very, very much for your time today. And again, I hope this was very helpful. If you have any follow-up questions, thank you so much. And thank you again for joining Rise and Set Summit by Generator Media. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.